What's going on, everybody? And welcome to the 26th episode of the CRZY podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is the show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, and a whole host of other things that matter to creative people. I want to go back and revisit the topic that we talked about actually in the very first episode of this podcast. And what we talked about was creativity. In that episode in particular, we talked about how light bulbs are bullshit. We talked about how most people have got this twisted notion that whenever you have an idea, that there's this big explosion, that there's a light bulb, that there's this moment where the clouds part and it rains champagne and puppies, and all of a sudden all your problems are solved. And the reality is that's just not the way it works. But the other reality is that show really just started to touch on this topic. Because what that show really did was it just looked at trying to put you in touch with your creative process. It looked at trying to put you in touch with how do you have ideas. But the reality is that there's more to it than that. That's just a process. That the other part that becomes so important, the other part where I see creatives struggle so much, are what do you put into that process? What are the insights, the opportunities, the observations that you put into that you can then build ideas on? So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. I want to talk a little about how do we find those insights? How do we find those opportunities? How do we make those the foundations for the ideas that you need to have? And how do we plug those into your creative process? Because that's probably the more important part. That's the part where you're going to find real separation in your work, in your career, and in everything you do, is your ability to see what others don't. Because that's really where you're going to make the mark in your career, because the reality is that I think we keep coming back. I keep coming back to talk about creativity, to talk about having ideas. And I think that honestly, it's getting to the point where I'm starting to struggle with why am I talking about this so much? Why am I getting so many questions about this? Why is it when I speak at all these different events that so many people are clamoring for leadership? So many people are clamoring to understand creativity. And in the last episode, in episode 25, I started to talk a little bit about what are some of the problems that I see in the design industry today. And I'll be honest, over the past week, I tried to let that go. I tried to let go some of the things that have been gnawing at me about our industry. Because I think whenever I think about this podcast, what I want to do is I want to share information. I want to share things that I've learned. I want to share hope, and I want to share ways that people can grow. But I also think that, you know what, sometimes for you to grow, you need to hear the truth. We're going to indulge in probably a very short-lived intervention or rant or something here, is that if we all want to get better at creativity, if we all want to get better at our craft, at what we're doing, we need to be aware of and we need to overcome what are really kind of two major shifts that have recently happened in the design industry. And we need to wake up to it, and we need to see it for what it is, and we need to understand how do we overcome it. Because the first shift that I really see is that we have become an industry, we have become a group of professionals that suddenly value beauty over everything else. We crave the instant gratification that we've learned from social media. We become infatuated with our likes on Instagram. That all of a sudden we've started to deify and look up to these internet famous designers. And it's a problem. And I think that some of the leaders of our industry also need to understand what they're doing to contribute to that problem. And I'm not one to really kind of call people out by name. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's healthy. Everybody's opinion is based on something. But I think that there are times that if you are at a certain place in this industry, if you are sharing opinions about what's going on, I think that comes with a responsibility. And the one that I had a front row seat to fairly recently, as I saw it this year, I traveled to speak at a conference in Miami. And as usual, the speeches that I was asked to give were on creativity and leadership. These continue to be the things that everybody wants to hear about. But one of the things that I saw there was that one of the big keynotes, one of the ones that filled the big conference room, was from Stefan Sagmeister. Stefan's been around for a long time. He does beautiful work. Sagmeister and Bullsh has done some groundbreaking design work. I will not dispute any of that. It's something that I certainly look to whenever I'm designing something for insight, for inspiration, for the creative process that leads them to do something differently. But the problem that I had was that I watched Stefan stand on stage for 45 minutes and giving a talk that espoused on the virtues of beauty. That was what we needed to be doing. We needed to be investing more in beauty. As creative people, that's what we needed to aspire to. And I guess it's just something that I have to disagree with. And I think it's a trend that we need to all start to become much more aware of. Because the reality is, as a creative director, as somebody who leads a team, the world is filled with people that can make pretty pictures. There is filled with people who can create beauty. They can make their own typefaces. They can do all these sorts of things. And that's fantastic. But the problem is that as somebody who leads a team, as somebody who is trying to be somebody that is pushing this industry forward, I don't need just beauty. What I need people who can create ideas. I need people who can lead teams. I need people who can change companies, and that's becoming damn near impossible. Because it's just, this idea of just beauty, I just think is grossly irresponsible. That we're taking beauty, we're taking this instant gratification, we're taking the dopamine hits that we're getting off of social media, and we're placing that over the real satisfaction that comes with creating something meaningful. The problem is that there are no shortcuts. That to be creative takes patience. It takes hard work. And both of those are in increasingly short supply. And the reason why I get so pissed off about this, and the reason why I've decided to talk about it after debating it for so long, is because the reality is that we live in an age where designers have a seat at the leadership table where we have to answer for far more than just beauty. Because aspiring to only create beauty is a dangerous concept, especially with what we have at stake here. The reality is that design, for the first time, probably since the Industrial Revolution, has been given an opportunity like never before. We are being looked at to lead change in companies. We are brought in to change industries. That is a massive, massive opportunity. And I hate to break it to you people, but we're blowing it. We, as a group, continue to value beauty. We continue to value these sort of things that are easy. The reality is that if you want to do great design, if you want to do design that changes things, the best expression that I've ever heard about that, I first heard from Edward Tufte. I don't know if it was his actual quote. I don't know if he took it from somebody else. But what he said, I thought hit the nail on the head, is that great design is a visual expression of great thinking. And this is the problem that we have before, is that we can't escape the fact, and I have said this for years and I will continue to say it. I'm the only person I've heard say it, so I'm going to keep saying it until I hear other people start to say it, is that creativity is a blue-collar profession. We have to stop just wanting to make things. We have to stop wanting to make things that we can put on Pinterest. We have to stop wanting to make things that are just judged on their aesthetics. Because what we need to start doing is to start thinking about the value behind what we're making. There are no shortcuts to hard work. And I get sick of people that keep asking me, what's the secret to success? Because it implies a shortcut. We're in an age where the people who put in the work will rise and succeed like we never have before. All of a sudden, you're seeing chief design officers. All of a sudden, you're seeing people that are at leadership tables where we've never been before. Not in a really, really long time. And the problem is that for those of us who just want to be internet famous, those of us who want to be Pinterest popular, those of us who just want the instant gratification and the easy answers, you're going to be in for a very frustrating chapter in your career. The bar is going to rise. This is why whenever people ask me, should designers learn to code? And I say no, they need to learn business because our work has to answer for more. It has to answer for value. It has to answer for changing businesses. It has to do more than just be pretty. And I think that this is just the problem, is because this is this other shift. Is because so many industries are in crisis. So many industries are being disrupted by the Airbnbs, the Ubers, all of these startups, that these big companies need us like they never have before. And as a result, we're seeing these roles like we never have before. And so I said, whenever I look back at history, not since the Industrial Revolution have I seen this. And I'll say it again, we're blowing it. Designers cannot hold their own at these tables. We cannot hold the conversations that we need to do. And it makes me angry that at 43 years old, all of a sudden I feel like the old man and the grumpy man in the industry who has to come out and scold people about this. Because I just see more and more designers that I interview, more and more people that I talk to at conferences who think this way, who think that it's just about pretty, about creating something, creating a template, creating a design that they can put on Dribbble, that they can put on Pinterest, that they can put online, and just let people like it for its aesthetics. And don't get me wrong, none of this, I would not be where I am if I was not a good designer. But trust me, my career would have flatlined about 20 years ago if that was all that I was a good designer. So the reality is that we need to wake up. As a profession, we need to wake up and want more. We have to demand more. We have to aspire more. Because these are the reasons why we need to do this stuff. Because just look at the podcasts we listen to. Look at the books that we read. We want leadership. We want creativity. But we are at an age and a time where our agencies and our companies have a systemic failure of teaching us how to do this stuff. So the reality is, if they're going to fail, and until we can get more people in the positions to help with this, it's up to us. It's up to you, the person who's listening to this podcast, to try to take some of this stuff and invest and want for more than just pretty. Because that's the problem. This is where, like I said, I see so many young designers that's all that they want. They just want to make. They just want pretty. And whenever it comes to looking for insights, for doing the work, for doing all these other things, all of a sudden that gets hard. That gets uncomfortable. This is where the millennials are also hurting us in doing this, and it's not their fault. This is an entire generation that is a byproduct of failed parenting strategies, that has the lowest self-confidence of any generation in history. And they've also are a generation that was raised that every solution has a right answer, that if they want for it, they get it just by asking for it. All of that is completely counter to what creativity is. With that rant out of the way, with it out of my system for whatever good it might have done, how do we change it? How do we start to do things differently? We've talked about the process to use, but I think that's the part where I got it wrong. That's the part where I missed. Was because it wasn't just about the process. Yes, you have to understand what do you do to have ideas, but if you have nothing, if you have no fuel to put into that engine, well, then it's not going to run, and it's damn sure not going to run very well. So there are 3 things that we want to focus on today. I want to focus on talking about how do you develop the measuring stick? How do you develop your palette to understand if your work and if your ideas are good? I want to talk about how do you find those insights and opportunities that are going to answer them to more than just being pretty. And whenever you find them, how do you judge them? How do you know if they're any good at all? And so those are really the 3 things that I want to focus on. The reality is that great ideas, and the best ideas I've ever had, the most popular, the most notable ideas I've ever had, have been based on insights and opportunities that I think other people couldn't see. And I think that that's the part of the creative process that so many people are missing out on, is how do you connect the dots? And for me, I think if you're going to see what other people don't see, if you want to find something different, it's really a 2-part process. And the first one, like I said, is developing your palette. And this is just simply meaning, how do you have a measuring stick? I've talked about this in other podcasts, and I'll talk about it here again. That phrase comes from the fact that I draw a lot of inspiration from chefs. I just think there's a fascinating correlation between watching what they do, of the wild creativity of coming up with a new dish, to the fact that whenever you walk into a restaurant, the expectation is that that dish is going to be executed exactly the same every single night. So how do you go from that rampant creativity to that sort of just regular production? How do you take young chefs and teach them to be creative, especially at a world-class level? And if you've ever seen the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi, Jiro Ono said something that I thought was incredibly insightful, because someone had asked him, whenever you have young chefs who come in, and you want them to be a part of your kitchen, you want them to be a part of your team, how do you teach them? And he said one of the first things that he does is he sends them out to great restaurants. He believes they will never be able to cook great food if they've never eaten great food. They don't have the palate or the reference point to understand what makes food great, what makes a dish great. I don't think creativity, I don't think design or writing or any creative endeavor is any different. if you aren't constantly consuming your given medium, whether it's design, whether it's copy, whether it's experiences, whether it's all of it. I mean, I draw inspiration from a massively wide gamut of things. You're never going to develop and then refine your palate so that whenever you do have an idea, you can judge it by something. You can't judge your dish against another one that actually everybody believes is really great. The thing is, the challenge is that the thing that I see with most creatives is that the time when they want to go out and try those dishes, the place where they want to start building their palate, is only when an opportunity presents itself. All of a sudden, they have a project that they're excited about. All of a sudden, something has come to them where they feel like, okay, well, now I need to put in the work. And it doesn't work that way. The way that I'll teach people to do, the way that I would tell you to think about it, is pick your favorite sport. Football, basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, whatever. But the reality is that athletes who perform at that level, who perform at a professional level, at a world-class level, work all year round. For a football team, it's not just for the 16 weeks of the season. They work year-round. And it's a lot of work that no one sees. They're putting in time in the weight room. They're out there doing sprints. They're out there doing drills. They're constantly working to make their craft better, to tune their instrument, so that in the moment when they need it, whenever game time comes, then they can put it on display. But the problem is that all anybody ever sees is that game time moment. Well, creativity, I don't think, is any different. That if all you're going to do is to start getting ready and to start to train and prepare whenever it's game time, well, you're going to get out there and you get your ass handed to you because you're not going to be ready, the same way an athlete wouldn't be ready. Because what you need to do is you need to be doing this constantly. You need to be constantly working to develop your palate. You need to be constantly working to empathize with your consumers. There's not an off season for this. That it's something that you have to constantly work at. And I think this is the number one place where I see people fail, where I see them fall down. They only want to do it sometimes. They only want to do it whenever the opportunity comes along. But then it's too late. Because you can't develop your palate that quickly. You can't recalibrate your measuring stick. You can't suddenly sit there and kind of grit your teeth and say, okay, now it's time to have an idea. The problem is you had to be working on this long before. It's one of those things where, because what you need to do, if you study sports psychology, if we have somebody, a basketball player, we'll say, that's going to shoot a jump shot, what you do whenever you train them is to go through and to drill shooting jump shots over and over and over again, to develop the muscle memory to do it, to be able to get that just simply down so that in the moment, when the tension comes, when you're in the game, what you don't want is your brain getting in the way. You don't want you sitting there thinking about how do you dribble the ball and how do I hold my hands and what's my follow-through going to be, because if you're overthinking it that much, you're going to shank the shot. Creativity, again, I think isn't that different. That what I need is I need to be mining these insights. I need to be mining these opportunities. I need to be developing my palate. So in the moment when it's called on, I have it there. That my brain can almost get out of the way a little bit and I can just draw on all of this stuff that I've soaked my head in. Because if not, then in the moment I am that basketball player who's thinking about how to dribble. How do I hold the ball? How do I shoot it? And I'm going to shank the shot because, again, I'm trying to force it far, far too much. And this is a place where, as I so violently kind of criticize social media in the beginning part of this podcast, I will say that honestly, social media, I think, can be a great way to develop your palate. I think it's an easy way to do it every day. But I think it only works, really, if you do two different things. I think the first one is to make it a ritual, that it has to be part of your day. It has to be a part of your process. For me, it's a big reason why I write. So every Friday on my blog, I release what are my weekly inspirations. These are the list of what are the most interesting articles, most interesting movies, most interesting things that I've seen that week. Well, knowing that I'm going to have to write that article every Friday forces me, no matter how tired I may be, no matter how overworked I might be, I need to spend some amount of time on my commute. In the morning, whenever I wake up and I'm watching TV. At night, whenever I'm in bed and I'm watching TV before I go to sleep. Sometime I have to find some time to be able to find some of this material. And I really do it in looking at it from a few different angles. And part of it is just looking at how do you make social media work for you, not the other way around. Because so many of us, I think we work for social media. What people like is that there is just a physiological human chemistry that whenever you see somebody like something you've posted, a photo, something on Facebook, something on Pinterest or Dribbble, those likes give you a hit of dopamine. Well, dopamine's the same reaction that many drug addicts get whenever they take drugs. And so it is really becoming a conditioned response that we like that sort of a thing, where we like to just be the ones that are going out there and putting out this content to get that dopamine hit. But we need to turn that around. And how do you start make social media work for you? And I really kind of think about my social media in three kind of distinct areas: personal, professional, and then honestly ones that are probably half and half. So something like Facebook for me is just purely personal. That's the place where I can go on, I can rant. I'm sorry, I'm not friends with people on Facebook who I'm not actually genuinely friends with. It just doesn't make sense to me. I need some closed space. I use Twitter and I use Pinterest. Those are really my professional sources. Those are the two things where I'm getting a lot of my best information from. And I'll talk about how I have those set up. And then honestly, Instagram probably is half and half. Instagram is half of kind of me trying to do the personal stuff of putting it out there, getting the little dopamine hits off of that. But it's also half consuming content that I hope can keep my palate fresh. Let's kind of look at those few things here for a minute. And we'll start with Pinterest. And Pinterest is interesting because I know, and I'll admit, that I think I'm probably, at least based on the statistics, probably the only man in America that uses Pinterest. And honestly, I love it because for me, it is a massive living mood board. But, like I said before, Pinterest fails us. Pinterest fails creative people because it really fails our process. Everything is static. Everything has a very brief description, and in most cases, a description we probably never even read. And so what it is that we're consuming is only judged on its visual merits. What you need to do is to understand that fact. And so if you're going to use Pinterest, use it as a thought starter, not as fodder, not as a place where you're going to just copy that work. That what I want to do is use it as a thought starter. Use it as a place that it's an interesting inspiration point. It's an interesting place to understand that maybe why I think they did something. What was the insight in a piece of branding? And then it's not just looking at it and go, oh, that's pretty. And I like it because it's pretty. Because here again, it's not good enough. But for me, Pinterest really serves two purposes. And part of it is, like I said, it is something that is a living mood board. It's a way to keep my palate fresh. That I can go in there every day. There are new pins, there are new things that I can go through and just kind of keep a rolling guide, a rolling mood board that I can plug into to just keep my palate calibrated. The other part of it is that whenever I see those things I like, over time, it can become a really great reference library. But I think it's with that second part where I see most people struggle, because what people struggle with, and what Pinterest I think doesn't quite understand, is the fact that the lack of structure whenever you come into it is a hugely debilitating thing for most people. Because tons of people will say, oh yeah, I tried Pinterest, I didn't really like it. And then I'll show them how I have it set up. I'll show them how I have my board set up. I'll show about the way that I've thought about it. And they go, oh, well, if I had structured it like that, I'd use it all the time. That's the inherent problem with Pinterest, is that it forces you, it asks you to bring your own structure to it. How do you want to work? On the one hand, that can be incredibly liberating. But like I said, I think for most people, it's incredibly debilitating because they don't really know how to structure it or how to organize their thoughts or that work in a way that's useful. So for me, I've really organized it around what are the things that I find inspiring. And this is everything from fashion to street art to digital design to furniture to packaging and all kinds of other stuff. Because those are the things that I just find inspiring. I find them places where I can find little insights or as a reference library. But I think that what you need to do is you need to create your own structure that works for you, that works for your process, that helps to inspire you and gives you the ability to keep these sort of things rolling in. But I think it also requires you to really be diligent about how do you curate the people that you follow. Some people are fantastic sources. They spend a lot more free time than I have, to be quite honest, putting content into Pinterest. And if you can find those right ones, it can really become this just flowing source of kind of interesting material. But it takes some time and investment to, first of all, find those people, and then to create the structure to put those things that you find into so you can hold on to them for later. You don't really want to become a digital hoarder, because that's even one of the things I will do on Pinterest is fairly regularly. I go back through my boards and just edit what's in there. I throw out what I don't like. I just kind of do a little bit of house cleaning because I want it to be useful. I don't want to have to sit there and sort through these big piles and piles of things that I pinned that no longer really have relevance for me. it really is just thinking about that. What works for you and your process? So, and then we move on to Twitter. And here again, I probably use Twitter in two different ways. On the one hand, I use it to build my brand because it's an easy way, it's a short way to be able to communicate with people. And because of the fact that it's so transient, people tend to engage with it far more than I've seen on Facebook or other mediums. So it's an easy way for me to go out and build my brand, but I think it's also a really nice way to stay up to date on what's going on. Here again, if you find the right people to plug into, if you find the right people to follow, they can be a source of some really interesting insights that they're personally having. Other people are really good at curating what are the best articles that are out there. And I tend to look for a mix of this. So where is the original thought leadership that I'm getting versus where are the places where people are finding really good thought leadership? Because it's inherently a good counterbalance to the visual overload and some of that just saccharin's beauty suite that comes with only being able to see the way something looks. And then probably the extension past Twitter that I then do is that there are two apps that are absolutely part of my everyday. That this is something that every morning I'm going through and reading. And those are Flipboard and another one called Appy Geek. And Flipboard, most people know, it's been around, I think, really almost since the launch of the iPad. And Appy Geek came in a few years later after that, but I think both are just fantastic sources for information. Appy Geek is specifically tailored towards digital. So if digital is something that you work in, it's an easy way to be able to go in and just set up topics like iOS or iPhone or Apple or information design or just different things like that that are very specific to digital. Flipboard can be much broader. It can be across very large topics like ideas or inspiration down to very specific things like UI, UX design. And here again, with both of these, it takes a little bit to tune it in and to get it just right. But there's a lot of these things that whenever you tune it, here again, it becomes just an easy way for it to bring information to you and just stay up to date. But I think with all these, it does require some amount of how do I curate it? How do I set it up? And I think that's what trips some people up is just they don't want to spend the time to do that. But I think once you do, it can actually become a genuinely, really just kind of impactful way of doing some of these things. And then there's another app that I use to honestly try to make sense out of most all of that, which is Pocket. And Pocket is similar to Evernote, where there's an app that you can have for your iPhone, your iPad, your laptop. But all it really does is it just lets me collect those articles whenever I find them, collect those little insights whenever I find them. Whether it's from Twitter or Appy Geek or Flipboard or whatever that is, it's the place where I house those. Partially because then I use them for that Friday inspiration article that I write. So every week I just go in, pull up what are the articles that I've saved for the past week, kind of say like, oh yeah, I think these good ones would be good to share. That one was maybe for a project that I'm working on, so that's not for the public. And then, there's a movie trailer I want to show my wife or something goofy, so I'll show that and then just delete it. But here again, it also then starts to become a great archive. So if I want to go back in, whenever I did the show on atomic design, I went into Pocket and just typed in atomic design, pulled up all the articles that I had ever saved on that and said, oh, okay, yeah, these are the good ones that I really wanted. But it really has come down to the fact that because of what I do and because of my process, I understand and embrace the idea that I have to curate my own news. Because it's one of those things where I have to figure out what matters to me. How do I keep my palate fresh? And as a part of this, the other thing that I've done is develop, I talked about this in the social media episode, I've developed an interesting rule. I wish I could tell you where it came from, but I think it honestly was born out of necessity because all of these mediums, all of this social media can become such a fire hose if unchecked. And so what I did was said, okay, look, I'm going to put some constraints around this. So if you go to Twitter, if you go to Pinterest, if you go to anything, Instagram, any of my social media networks, I have this rule of 115. I don't know where the number came from. It just is what felt about right to me. And what it is that I refuse to follow more than 115 people on any social media channel. What I see is people who suddenly follow 500, 900, 2,000, 3,000 people. The channel just becomes a fire hose. You aren't actually consuming anything of value because every time you go, it's just such an overwhelming amount of information. What I discovered was if I dial in on 115, what I do is if I find a new source of information that I really like, somebody who's saying something that I think is really interesting, it forces me to go back and look at that list. We'll use Twitter, for instance. Found somebody really interesting I want to go follow. I'm following 115 people. Great. I need to go back to that list and figure out who isn't cutting it. Who am I going to cut out of this list so I can put this new person in? And what this does, as a bit of an interesting fact, is that it forces you to get rid of some of the noise. the pity follows that you have, the friends that you follow who you don't actually find interesting, but you follow them just because they're your friends, and if you don't, somehow they're going to judge you for it. But so what I'll say is, like, great, if we're actually friends, we're friends on Facebook. Most of the time you're posting the same stuff across. You put on Instagram, it's going to Facebook too, so let's dump Instagram off that list. I'll still see it somewhere, but what I want to do is I just want to tune this channel. I want to tune in Twitter to really be useful to me. So one in, one out. I would tell you to think about that, about how are you making sure that you're getting value out of it, that the network is working for you and you're just not working for it. But I think these are ways that social media can help just define your palette, because you have to have the measuring stick. You have to have some way of saying, okay, I found this opportunity. Is it any good? So once you've done that, you started to work through your palette. You started to work through, how do I bring this stuff into my head? How do I start to understand just what good is? Well, from there, we have to get more specific. We have to actually start, how do we translate kind of just the broader expertise and bring it down to actually solving the problem that you have, to working with your client, your customer, working on the problem that you have. And the best way that I've known to describe this is that I think what you need to do is you need to start living your problems. Because I think that what you're really looking at is like you develop your palette so you have your measuring stick, but it doesn't give you the insights that you need to create really great new ideas. And those insights really come from, and at least for me, they come from empathy. So that you really have this idea of understanding and walking a mile in the shoes of the people you're designing for. I've talked about this in the past, about the lengths that I've gone to understand some of this stuff. That whenever I worked on car companies, I would actually go out and talk to people at gas stations, which has me banned from some of them in the states of Texas and New York. But what it did is it allowed me to genuinely understand, how did people think about their cars? How did they relate to them? Whenever I started at Starwood, I lived in a hotel for 364 days. I could have lived in corporate housing, but I really felt like a hotel was going to genuinely let me understand, probably unlike anything else, how do I empathize with people who are actually staying in hotels? Because the reality is, in these moments, these are the moments that matter. Because these are the moments where you're looking for the insights, for the opportunities, where you're trying to build empathy with the people that you're working with. And the reason why I say that is because over the course of my career, I've really come to embrace the fact and know that I have to live the problem. I have to walk a mile in their shoes to see what others can't. Because so many other people, here again, aren't willing to put in the work in the off season. What they want to do is think, oh, well, I've bought a car, I've stayed in a hotel, I understand what their problems are, I don't need to do anything else, I'm already an expert. That kind of hubris and arrogance is what creates mediocre work, because you don't. What you have done is that you have a generalized reference point. You haven't really been paying attention to what goes on in a hotel. You didn't really talk to the staff. You didn't really understand what their problems were. You didn't understand what is it like to stay hundreds of days in a hotel room. And I think that that's the thing, is that I have to be able to do that. And the other reason why I have to be able to do that is because to find a really great idea, I have to do something else. I have to be able to look past what maybe even the consumers can't see. If I just solve the problem that they're asking for, if I just take the obvious, I'm doing what everybody else does. I'm doing the easy answer. I'm going to create things that are going to be the same that our competition are creating. I'm not going to find any value. I'm not going to find any business differentiation in what it is that I'm doing, because I'm just taking the easy insight. And so in these moments, in the gas stations, in the hotels, in the bank branches, and everything else in between, what I'm doing and what you need to do is really look for 4 things. I think that there are 4 things that just simply, if you live the problem that is going on, you just want to notice when one of these 4 things happen. Whenever I've noticed these things, those are what start to become the seeds that will germinate into the insights and into the great ideas that I've ever had. The first thing that I look for is, in the process of doing something, are consumers doing either workarounds or their own adaptations? Are they creating something? Are they going about the process in a way that I wouldn't expect, to do a workaround that I wouldn't have thought would have been there? And here again, whenever that happens, I'm not trying to judge it. All I'm trying to do is to take note of it, to take note of my reaction to it, that I found it odd or interesting, or that there was something there I wasn't expecting. Because here again, in these 4 things, what we're looking for are these moments that stand out, so that we can note them, write them down, come back and think about them later, because there's something to them. There's an opportunity there. and that opportunity is where we need to come back and work on. The next one is that I look for things that people care about. It may sound really simple, but when you talk about something like a car, which is basically your main way of getting around in the world, when you talk about something like a hotel room, which is quite honestly a home surrogate for people, what matters to them in those moments really matters. What are the things that they really care about, and how can I tap into that as an opportunity? I look for things that are missing. I'm really looking for, whenever I'm going through the process, well, whenever I get to some place, if I'm really living that problem, if I'm walking a mile in their shoes, I get to some point in the process and I go, man, you know what? I really wish something would have happened. I really wish something would have happened with this relationship, with this process, with something. Again, there's an opportunity there because something is missing. And when something is missing, it's our opportunity to be able to create something. And lastly, the thing that I always am on the lookout for is anything that surprises me. Anything that I just go, wow, I never would have expected that. I never would have thought that would have been there. Those are the things that whenever I'm doing that, those are the moments that you have to hold on to and be so aware of. But they're the moments that you will only find if you are genuinely going out and living what's going on. It's the same process that I use whenever I look at new technology, when I look at new design, when I look at workflows or building teams or anything like that, is that these four things, workaround and adaptations, looking for things that people care about, looking for things that are missing, and for anything that surprises me, it works in basically every part of your life. If you think about your friendships, your relationships, if you want to get better at those, watch for these things. Because here again, being able to tap into these is an opportunity. It could be an opportunity to have a great idea. It could be an opportunity to become a better friend. But it's a basic life skill that I think works in so many things. But whenever I find these, I know that I've found an insight, or I know that I've found an opportunity. And it's just something that I want to be able to make note of and to be able to come back to. And I look at those insights to really see if they do one of three things. Because here again, how do I judge my insights to know if they're any good? The first is just to simply say, okay, look, does this represent an unmet need? Does it point to an area that needs improvement? Yes or no? Because if there's an unmet need there, then that again, that's an opportunity, that's an insight. Does it reveal an aha? That once I say it, it clarifies and simplifies what it is that I'm trying to do. That all of a sudden there's an insight to why people act a certain way. Why do they think a certain way? Why do they do a certain thing? Why is something selling when it makes no sense? That there's an aha there. And that the last part of it is to make sure that it is not a solution. Because what you want it to do is I want it to be something that inspires a lot of ideas, but it doesn't point to one single idea. Because that's the other thing that you're going to want to do is when you find the insight and the opportunity, your brain is naturally going to want to race to have solutions. So what you need to do is just to take it at the opportunity, to not run it down, to not immediately try to narrow it in or lump stuff together or kind of make it into just one nicely, neatly packaged little thing. Because that's not the way that you really need to do. Because if it passes those criteria, then I know how I have an insight that I can build ideas on. And that I know that those ideas are going to resonate with my customers. I'll give you an example, because coming out of the 364 days at Starwood, one of the insights that I had was I watched people time and time again at the front desk, in the lobby, in all these other places, really want information. They wanted to know when the restaurant was open. They wanted to know if the pool was open. They wanted to know where the gym was, or something like that. Time and time again, I watched them want to do that. But time and time again, the signage in the hotel failed them. The front desk was busy. They couldn't figure these things out. They weren't going to go to a website and then all of a sudden search for the hotel and dig into the property page and then go down in the hopes of finding out that something was going to be available. Well, so that's an opportunity. It's actually a huge opportunity, because what we can do is that we can then back that out and say, okay, well, there's an unmet need there. The need for information, the need for guidance, that I'm in a place that's a home surrogate, yet I'm unfamiliar with it, that I'm traveling because I want that experience, but I'm not familiar with the town that I'm in. So these are all opportunities. And what that did was that insight led to just the core concept of we just want to give our consumers the information that they need when they need it. The reality is that we had a life cycle that we could understand. We knew when you were going to show up someplace to check in. We knew how long you were going to be there, and we knew when you were going to leave. So based on that, what I could do is then I could build experiences. I could build an app that said, okay, well, before you get there, you're going to care about things like the hotel address. You're going to care about things like phone number. If you're traveling abroad, you're going to care about things like the address of that hotel in the local language. Well, after you check in, those things become slightly less relevant. Now I care about dining. I care about the gym. I care about the things that are actually going on in the hotel. And then after I leave, I care about things like calling an Uber to be able to get to the airport, writing a review, maybe rebooking the hotel, maybe sharing where I've been with friends of mine, because we had brands like W that had a social currency to them that if you shared that you stayed at W, people probably would think more of you. So I could actually create a smart interface that could adapt to those needs. And that the other thing I could do was then to just simply take that concept of give people the information that they need when they need it. And out of that, based on that insight wasn't going to change. That's a human truth that whenever people travel, they need that information. It's hard to get. Okay, well, if that's not going to change, now all of a sudden I have a concept that's a platform idea. That's probably the closest thing I've ever come up with to a technology-proof idea. Okay, well, that has incredible power. Now, all of a sudden, all of our content starts to make more sense. We're not just driving you to hit the book button. Now, whenever we bring new things in, we can layer it in on top. It lets us get to solutions and to ideas that we have, like keyless entry, like mobile check-in, like all these other things, because now we can start to push out that concept more and more. But it all went back to the off-season. It all went back to staying in that hotel, to putting in the time, to talking to the people, to looking for those insights of that moment of just that something was wrong, something was off, that something made my brain itch in that moment. And I said, hey, there's an unmet need there. Nobody else is doing this stuff. Everybody else is they're only really caring about what happens until you hit the book button. They aren't even thinking about what happens in the stay. Like, digital is almost becoming irrelevant then. And so it was this cascade of ideas that led from that off-season work that led to that work. And then you extrapolate that out 6 years later, and then all of a sudden it's 9 Apple keynotes later. It's being in an Apple commercial. It's, actually 4 Apple commercials. But that was the problem, is it all went back to that incredibly unglamorous off-season. And I really think that's the thing, is that you have to develop your palate. You have to live the problem. You have to go through and put in the time to think about this stuff. If you don't, the insight isn't there. You don't know how to judge the insights that you have, because it really is something that you have to see what the others don't. So many other hotel companies, all they wanted to do was, like I said, they just wanted to focus on the book button. And that was it. But they missed such the bigger opportunity. They missed a better understanding of how their guests operated, of what it is they actually needed, that they were designing for themselves, not for other people. And that was such a huge fundamental miss. And I think, honestly, even whenever we got into Apple Watch, it was the ability to do that process again, to see that most people didn't understand that, well, whenever you used your phone, whenever I used that app, that was a utilitarian thing. That was something where I wanted to get something done, but I was willing to do it across a 2 or 3 month horizon. My watch, well, then I just wanted to do something that was going on right then in that moment. But those were the insights that really led us to be able to create that stuff. As a final thought, right, I think that the thing that we need to do is that we have to stop glorifying the ends of the work that we do. The ends being the first 10% of a project, when it first kicks off, when there is that moment of great possibility. And then the other end of that spectrum at the end, whenever it launches, whenever there's the awards and the press and the accolades. It's that 80% in the middle. It's all the hard work that comes out of that. And that it's even beyond that. It's the work that needs to go into it before the project even kicks off. Because the reality is that I just inherently knew that I didn't understand a hotel guest, that I needed to stay there to understand what their mindset was. I didn't know that I was going to be asked to redesign the app at that point. Honestly, at that point, apps really didn't even exist. But it was a thing that I knew I needed to understand that mental model. I needed to look for the opportunity. I needed to put in the time. And I still do. I still put in the time every single day. Every single day, weekends, weekdays, days, nights. I'm going on social media and consuming the work that's out there. I'm looking for new thought leadership. I'm constantly trying to keep my palette relevant and up to date. I'm going out and I'm living the industries that I work in. I'm looking for the opportunities, the things that are missing, the things that are different, the workarounds, the opportunities to find where do we need to go, to not where we are. Because where we are keeps us in a features race that is not going to get us any separation from anybody else. But that's the difference. That's the thing that we need to do. We need to give up the beauty and we need to embrace the hard work. We need to go through And we need to put in the off season. We need to put in this work. We need to embrace the fact that here again, and I will continue to say this as long as I do this show, that creativity is a blue-collar profession. There are no shortcuts. There's no easy way around this. That if that's the path you want, if you want pretty and you want easy, you're going to lead a career of a middling salary with middling ability with probably no recognition and really making no difference. That it's only through the people that put in the hard work, that put in the work in the off season. Those are the people that are going to become great. They're going to stand out. And because the reality is that at a time when design is valued like never before, the next step in our evolution is going to be, because people see value there, because people see people getting paid well there, suddenly there's going to be a lot more of us around. And so if you don't start this work now, if you don't understand the value of this now, if you don't do these sort of things to keep yourself moving forward, to force yourself to move forward, you're going to become irrelevant. Your career is going to flatline. You're going to become incredibly frustrated. And you're going to become some of the people that I talk to. Whenever they talk and they come up to me and they say that they wish that they could get back to the place where creativity is the way that I talk about it, where it's hopeful, where it's powerful, where it's interesting, because for them, that's not what it is anymore. And I think that is the problem that we see. This is why so many people come to the talks about creativity and they come about leadership, because they aren't forcing their way forward. They want it to be easy, and it's not going to be. It's going to be blue collar. And so with that, I hope that this helps. If you have thoughts about it, if you think I'm right, if you think I'm totally out of my head, head over to my Facebook page. You can like it, but it's a place where we're really building the community. It's where this conversation is going on. It's where you can get updates. It's where you can ask questions. Like I said, if you think it's great, tell me. If you think you really have an issue with that, tell me. This isn't meant to be a one-way conversation, and I certainly know that I don't have all the answers, but I am definitely at least the one who's willing to put it out there to try to help. The only compensation, as always, I'll ever ask for the show, take a few minutes, go over to iTunes, leave a review. It makes a big difference, and it brings more people to the show, and that's really the point of all this, is trying to help this industry, try to help more people, trying to help people get better at what it is that we do. If you have any questions, if you want to take a look at the show notes, if you want to listen to other episodes, you can always head over to podcast.stephengates.com. Stephen is spelled Stephen. And like I said, whenever you go over there, you go into episodes, you can find the 25 other episodes that I've done so far. You can find related articles. You can find a whole host of other things about each one of those shows. As always, the boys down in legal want me to remind you that all the views here are my own. They don't represent any of my current or former employers, that these thoughts are just, and as always, my own. And finally, I say it every single time because I mean it every single time, but thank you for your time. I know that time is truly the only real luxury that we have, and I'm always incredibly humbled that you want to spend any of it with me. So until next time, when hopefully I'll have burned off some of this frustration, and we'll move on to another interesting topic dealing with leadership, creativity, design, and who knows what else. Stay crazy.